Hello and welcome. Today is a continuation from our previous webinar on the state of IT in 2021 going into next year. And we're going to continue the conversation where we left off, and we didn't have the opportunity to discuss what is the human impact of work from anywhere. In managing that work, and any types of workflows and tricks and tips that make working from home easier, as well as the realities facing IT admins. It's a different time from when I was an IT admin just a few years ago. Now, if you don't know what SAML and OAuth are, in managing your cloud infrastructure, or what zero trust is, it may be time to brush up, or more so if your superiors are less aware of those concepts and why you would want to do that. So we have panelists with us today. Stephen Hodges is a systems admin at a company that makes, it's US based, and they do a lot of web development. And his challenge is to corral developers and engineers together, which is sometimes challenging. And when you're not in an office and you can't corner someone, getting that type of cooperation to do something such as implementing MFA or do this that way before you log into Git, that can be a challenge. Idan Michel, am I saying that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. Idan's company is dealing with a lot of regulated environments. They're in fintech. There's different governance for data and regulations pretty much everywhere they play, and they're listed on the London Stock Exchange. And the challenge in working from anywhere there is being smart and communicating, but also not having that time from when you're working encroach into your own. And myself, I mentioned I was an IT admin. I've done a bunch of other stuff, but that's not important. Let's get into why you're here. Work from anywhere is the new normal, and people don't necessarily discuss their feelings, but if you look at these results from the survey, it's startling. There's a plurality that feels a lot of pressure, and that can lead to burnout, that can lead to being less effective in your role. So this is an important topic that we just didn't want to skip. So moving on from here, how do we create work-life balance with the expectations both management and your internal customers and external customers have, all the stakeholders have, and it falls squarely on your shoulders. So let's have a brief conversation and start with Idan. We've chatted about some very interesting things that you've done to optimize your time and really manage workflows. Do you want to briefly discuss what some of those things are that help you reclaim some of your time?
So, yeah, sure. So first we need to understand that IT folks, IT professionals, they have a home as well. So they have lives, they have children, and burnout is something that we need to manage. At the same time, when people are working from home, then they're working different hours. Some are more concentrated in the evening, in the morning, and the last thing we want is not to be enablers. Because if someone wants to start coding or doing a marketing campaign or looking at the financing systems, and they have a problem, they need IT. Now, one option would be hire more IT. The other option would be just to being smarter. What does that mean? It means that we're able to tie up systems to same systems, for example, Cloud Directory, and allow the IT admins to do minimal work to solve these problems. For example, patching a system, running a fix, unlocking a user, and lost phone, for example, with bring your own device. All of these, once you're able to tie them up and have less systems you need to log into, these are actually allowing the IT admin to be able to solve these problems in minutes or less. and these become a non-issue. Now, for an example, what I did is use our firewalls at our HQ, for example, and other networks as well, and tie them up to the same directory, cloud directory. You can use it for Active Directory, you can use JumpCloud, you can use Okta, you can use whatever you want, using the technologies that create these integrations. Now, VPN goes there, Captive Portal goes there. These same credentials are for your computers. These same credentials are for your any other OAuth or Google login or whatever social login you're using. These systems, this ties you up and allows you to manage that, and at the same time see what happens, because that directory is that unit that authenticates everything. So you also get that cyber intelligence and cyber without going into sim world, you get these logs about what happens. Now, for me, my team, it's really easy. Something happens, go in there, unlock it, done. Really simple. So it solves a lot of the problem.
Yeah, it sounds like you've created some really cool workflows that save you time, and that's time that would have been otherwise taken away from your obligations at home or your personal time. Steve, we touched on you dealing with a lot of engineers, and it's difficult enough to deploy MFA when you have people who are remote, salespeople and so forth. Engineers can have a mind of their own. So you have the challenge. We discussed workflows with you, Don. On your side of the coin here, how do you deal with people when you're remote and you can't walk over to their desk? You can't corner them in engineering.
Yeah, we've looked at our Google Workspace logs the other day, and the amount of emails that have been sent out to the entire staff had doubled since the pandemic started. So we do a lot of emails, we do a lot of team meetings. Our company's divided up into divisions, and then underneath that is teams. So we do a lot of team meetings to kind of discuss the importance, and I have a group of engineers that represent every single division in the company, and we meet on a monthly basis to kind of discuss any upcoming changes and how best to roll that out. One of the big things that we have to do, obviously, is get buy-in from our staff. And so that provides, for me, rolling out multiple MFA is a huge, it's a given. Of course, we're going to do it, but and I have no problem doing so. But for the rest of our staff, it's getting the buy-in so that it's not just, our IT team is dictating all types of changes, and so ultimately we are in some aspect, but getting the buy-in so it doesn't feel like that is a huge part. So yeah, emails, a lot of meetings, and then being able to access remote computers. We've been utilizing some other resources such as TeamViewer, AnyConnect, stuff like that, so that we can access their computers to work on things that would require us to have physical access to.
And circling back to the life-work balance concept, I'm assuming that your schedules, especially since your team's in different time zones, sometimes they don't always overlap. How do you deal with when meetings and in other activities are encroaching on your personal time and family life?
Yeah, we have a kind of a core hours of work that all of our employees have to be available to, and it was kind of set up when we were solely based out of the Central Time Zone. But just because it's 10 to 3 Central Standard Time, and so because of it's kind of in the middle of the day, it works out really well because we have people on both coasts, and so no matter what, there's only plus or minus 2 hours depending on which direction you go. So 10 to 3 is a nice overlap. We have most of our meetings during that time when it comes to staff-wide stuff, or where I'm meeting with a lot of people across the divisions.
That's interesting, and I'll just chime in briefly from our experience at JumpCloud. We'll do experiments such as maybe every couple of weeks we'll skip a Thursday meeting, or we'll block off hours that are marketing work hours. I was an IT admin, but purely marketing now, except for when I fire up a VM. So back to the tech side of things. The slide we're on now discusses IT budget. And certainly there was a rush to fund work from anywhere initiatives. Let's start with Adan. Has any change in budget affected your ability to focus on your current goals?
Nope. But we're different. Back in 2009, I joined Plus 500, and from the start, I went and disseminated every single infrastructure that I had, because we're a global group, so we are creating more and more subsidiaries worldwide, and we have in Australia, Singapore, London. We now have finished a merger and acquisition in the US, Cyprus, Seychelles, you name it. And having that vast of a network just in order to authenticate computers just doesn't make any sense. So I was literally setting up this, and that the pandemic allowed me to just say to the group, we're working from home, and we had minimal changes. So we were actually invested in that way, because we were prepared. That was our strategy, right? Now, but saying that, it's not that by looking at the market, because I'm using the technologies that are in the market, that these uplifts in order to achieve that are minimal, because you are saving on licensing. For example, if you're using Active Directory, which is Microsoft, and you need an open license or they're going to stop using open licenses, but you're using a different license and you're going to pay, and software assurance in order to authenticate users. And once you reach that point where you're saying, okay, I need to upgrade that OS, maybe it's time for me to choose or look at something different. And I still get the same things or even better features. For example, SAML, OAuth, other stuff. I'll need less connectors. And it's not just related to JumpCloud, it's related to the entire market, because we're adding more and more cloud technologies. We're being hybrid, even if we're not hybrid. The cloud is not just GCP or AWS. The cloud is everything that's, as a service. Think about it this way. If it's as a service, it's a cloud. And AWS can be infrastructure as a service, and GCP can also be infrastructure as a service, or big data as a service. But once everything is as a service, you're being hybrid. So the world is hybrid, and it needs to be able to governance the authentication and lean into knowing who is going where. So
wow,
today's
that's
technology
really
is not that expensive.
Change for certain. And Stephen, and thank you, Adan. Stephen, what's your experience? How has budget either going up in increments or going down or staying flat? How has that affected you?
Yeah, I mean, our budget increased June at the beginning of the pandemic, just due to natural stuff that I wanted to accomplish, and then it skyrocketed quite a bit once the pandemic hit, and we realized the severity of the pandemic, and this wasn't going away in 2 weeks. Prior to the pandemic, we had an open source identity management tool that was running off of Red Hat, and it only did LDAP and SSH authentication. And so from the beginning, I wanted to find something that would also do SAML and SCIM and all kinds of other protocols that we might need, Radius, etc. And I just didn't have a good enough, I couldn't find a reason that our stakeholders would approve of such a huge investment into it. And the pandemic hit, and we went along with it. It was fine. Took a long time to provision, deprovision users, etc. But once we realized the severity of the pandemic, moving into JumpCloud was kind of a given. It was a very easy sell, especially because, like Adan mentioned, the cost savings on my side it saves me so many hours when we hire a new employee or an employee leaves. It takes me an hour to provision everything versus half a day, a full day to get everything set up, depending on the role.
Absolutely. And especially now with so many people job jumping, the value of onboarding and having that good experience is great. And equally on the other side of things, offboarding is sometimes something that's neglected, and that can cause security and other problems. So very nice to hear you've had a great experience. So if we move on to our next slide. It doesn't sound like this may apply to yourselves. but some folks feel that organizations are spending too much on work from anywhere, or maybe they could be consolidated or the budget could be used more effectively. And I believe we touched on that. So rather than dwell on this slide, we discussed, for instance, consolidation into a platform that provides these things. And there's a number of options there, including us. So moving on to the next slide. Let's start with you this time, Stephen. With the launch of Windows 11, even the folks in Redmond are saying, okay, the way we've been doing things to authenticate, the old Kerberos world's gone. SAML auth are so important, and we're all moving in that direction. And it's not just the authentication, it's having policies, having a secure configuration, having the appropriate EDR and such. So we're IT folks, we get zero trust, but our findings in the survey were that management doesn't really know that. So Stephen, how would you make the case to your employer, assuming you haven't done that? Let's pretend, let's role play here, because I think you have.
Yeah, it's surprisingly very easy at the very for our organization, I should say. Other organizations that I've spoken with, it's increasingly hard. It's a huge issue to get the stakeholders to approve that. But our CEO actually came up to me about a week ago and started talking about zero trust, because we've seen so many in the past couple of months, so many agencies and large, oil corporations, for example, get hacked and ransomware. Dallas, Texas, I think, had that happen with their police systems, the oil rigs out in the East Coast, just everything. And so being able to lock that down in a way so that we know who's accessing what resources, and being able to apply zero trust was a huge thing to us. So it was fairly easy for me, at least, just because the CEO came up to me while I was planning on it, and just made my life much easier on that ground.
Absolutely. Colonial was due to poor IT hygiene and lack of offboarding, which is something we just discussed, is be able to have that workflow done effectively and have that visibility across your different assets. So we have sort of a different side of the coin here with you, Adon. Being regulated, things such as GDPR have teeth, and you're probably doing zero trust before all of us marketing folks decided to call it that. So if you could comment on the importance of this and how you would recommend this to other IT people, what are the types of, how would you persuade someone who might be on the fence or unsure?
Okay, so that's a brilliant question. I was hoping you would actually say it this way. So first, we need to understand what zero trust is. It's a framework. We're not going to be discussing it because everybody can do zero trust their own ways. But I like using an example. So it's the classic IT example. You have a firewall, you have a switch, you have a VLAN, and you have in that office a port. You tag that port in that specific VLAN, and you're using DHCP. So where's your security? Because that VLAN is going to be attached on the firewall, and it's going to allow you to reach certain places in your network, assuming that you're segregated, right? But you are trusting the physical location of that desk, and anybody with DHCP can just click it. So now you're saying, yeah, but we have MAC address. That's easily spoofed. That's not a security measure. A MAC address is not a security measure. And then you're saying, yeah, but we're using a different technology and a different username. That's easy as well, social engineering. So what basically is what you need to look at is how you know who is accessing something, and how do you know when someone is trying to access something that he or she or it shouldn't. For example, a captive portal that connects to your directory. For example, being able to use these same credentials to identify lateral movement. For example, exempting specific resources and addresses from that captive portal. And that way, you literally can achieve a flat network without any VLANs, because a VLAN is not a security measure. A VLAN is just in order to reuse cables. Firewalls are able to say what you can do, but they assume something. They assume something. Now, with zero trust, just think about it, zero assumptions. Because if you assume something, you trust it. And that's how I approach it. And that's how I approach it when I need to discuss it with someone. I always like to look at that basic design, because that basic design, that's the major problem. And this is what we're trying to solve today with zero trust. So anyone can solve it in a million ways, and that's fine, as long as you're aware of it. And the most important thing is to understand you don't need to achieve maximum zero trust. There is no maximum zero trust. The moment that you employ this, thought of process, like I just described, you will identify where you can and where you can't. And where you can't, these are the places that you will look more clearly and put more, monitoring logs and stuff like that, because these are now your crown jewels or your pathways. It will be easier to make sense of your network.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we're moving from a world where David trusts Don, Don trusts Stephen, and Stephen trusts Jane. Therefore, David trusts Jane to zero trust. That old model isn't going to cut it these days. Cyber criminals are very sophisticated. So thank you for that response.
It also goes further to work from home.
Yeah, it does.
You use your computer.
Everyone has a different network.
Yeah, you use your computer from home at your Wi-Fi, and your son has a computer, your daughter, and then you, as an IT admin, you open up your Active Directory or whatever, and over VPN. You're assuming that this computer is good. That computer is not. It's in a different network that you don't control, and you don't know what's going on in that network. So this is why zero trust today is getting more attention.
Yeah, and you don't know it's being plugged into those machines either, which with physical attack vectors, that's becoming more and more a concern. Anyway, so this is a great topic now that we're on security. We've seen a shift, and I've also noticed this in a data lake that a buddy who has a SIN company has expressed, that there's now more vulnerability, exploits due to vulnerabilities, either from supply chain or just the focus going there, than there was in the past. And IT admin have caught on to that. And it's gone from weak passwords are a problem to we need to manage patching and we need to manage supply chain. Let's start with you, Stephen, about your biggest security concerns, and let's start with vulnerabilities, but also want to hear things from your perspective, being a company that's doing web development.
Yeah, I hate to say this, especially to a panel webinar, but prior to the last 2 years, we weren't really managing patches and updates across at least our employees' infrastructure, so our computers and stuff, the servers, net, firewall, switches, everything. We're doing routine maintenance on to make sure everything was being applied. If Apache released a security vulnerability, we made sure we applied those within a day of them being released. But yeah, hopping into the managing our employees' computers and mobile devices and stuff, making sure that that's being patched has been a complicated battle. Just especially with we don't have an Active Directory on in-house at the moment, so we don't have a way of rolling out group policy to make sure that updates are being applied when they should be. All of our users are able to just bypass that.
Well, let's talk.
So.
We have a new policy about that. So if people haven't been up to date on the developments with the platform, that's something that's being provided and further investments coming. But taking off my marketing hat, please continue.
Yeah, no, I knew about that. I didn't know we were talking about it on the webinar, but we were very excited for that. We're actually our organization's helping beta test it to make sure that it applies and works well. And we're thrilled for it just because Windows releases so many updates and Apple does too, just not to the level that Windows does. And so ensuring that all of our Windows machines are up to date with various security things.
I did sales years ago. It's a hard habit to kick. So, Adan, let's hear from your perspective, because you have all these regulators that are going to be breathing down your neck, and someone's going to be in trouble if there's an exploit, and there will be. But let's hear from your perspective.
I want to tie this a little bit to the first question about the stress and working from home life balance, because you want to patch things when it's comfortable. The first thing you want to do when it's comfortable. So we set our endpoints. We have a lot of them, like hundreds more, several hundreds, to automatically patch from Microsoft, and that's fine. But we're able to use tools. Now, we did that before the pandemic when we were in the same network. We came on board with JumpCloud before the pandemic, and we had to roll it out during the pandemic, which was really difficult. I planned on finishing it Q1 2020, and it was Q3 2020 because of the pandemic happening. So now we're able to just push a patch, and even if JumpCloud doesn't provide us that feature, I just can push remote commands, PowerShell script, batch file, whatever. It's so easy, and it goes on Linux or Windows or Mac. And what this allows me is to create these commands and push them and monitor their approach, and that way I can patch, and I know what is patched. I can even survey my computers. Now, we also use EDR technology that can do that as well. We also use software inventory tools that we get that, but it's so much easier to not have to use the entire cybersecurity stack of an EDR to push something that's ad hoc, even if it's just updating Chrome, okay? Where we can use tools like Chocolatey, if you guys are not aware of it, it's there for a bazillion years. It's very nice. It's the Windows package manager. It's open source, but donate. So basically, these tools allow you to patch things, and that reduces that stress because you click a button and then you troubleshoot what's not working. Mostly as that computer's offline.
Okay, and certainly you're an advanced user of our platform, and as we've discussed, there's a number of these scenarios that you're doing that. We'll be working with you to share with everyone to help solve problems and support our community. Okay, so here's going back, and that was a nice transition inadvertently there. So if I recall my days as an IT administrator, some of which were like a blur, sometimes it was hard to service people who are out of office the same way as those were in, especially salespeople. And you can no longer, and there really aren't those big sales meetings these days where you can just hijack their equipment and do what you need to do on that one day every quarter they're in the office. So there's the communication aspect there, and the availability of working with someone. It's different to do it virtually as it is to basically stand over their shoulder and work things out. So in addressing user needs, it's on IT administrators and support and how well we handle our tickets and satisfy our users, but also the tools and technologies that we use should be user-friendly. And when making those types of purchasing decisions, what's foremost in your mind of tools that users will interact with, whether it's zero trust or anything else? I'm stumbling on my words here, but let's go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I think the biggest point that we start off with is, like I said, I touched on earlier in a previous question, was that I have a small group of developers and engineers that I work with to make sure that we have the buy-in from everybody. And so we before we make a firm decision, myself and the COO research it to make sure that it is something that we want to do, and then present it to them to make sure that they understand at least where we're going with this, or where we're going with the software purchasing or IT purchasing across the board. So it's a huge portion of the thought is trying to figure out to make sure that we have the buy-in from the employees and to make sure that it's not going to make their lives harder, because we don't want to, ultimately time is money, and we don't want to add time to their workflow, which in turn reduces our intake.
Absolutely, and I'll jump in here as well, because when I was an IT admin, we were a manufacturing company. So there were people in offices, there were remote salespeople, and their needs were very different from people on the factory floor. And one example I can give you of a fail from working with a prior MSP was that biometric time clocks were ordered. And if you ever worked on the factory floor, you understand the cadence of breaks, where it isn't just a lunch break. It's every so often there's a break and people line up. And then if someone's working in the shop, they might not have fingerprints. So you can imagine how a solution that looks so good on paper became more of a problem than it was worth. So understanding the user experience and getting the buy-in from people versus becoming a hindrance, even though that wasn't a virtual scenario, is so important. So moving on to the next slide. Just curious, Idan, where is your focus going to be over the next year as you continue to make investments? It sounds like you're at a steady state, but obviously there's always a to-do list.
This is interesting. I need to choose one of these.
Pick a card, any card.
I'd like to look at more on mobile technologies. I'll explain my decision. So we have security technologies. That's a given. Remote management technologies, it's there. Just pick one. Collaboration tools, software apps, Google Workspace, Monday, Asana, choose. Cloud services, we have more than enough. What I think is being overlooked right now is the entire bring your own device. And I just put that in mobile technologies. And the reason that it's there is because the devices that we bring are mobile devices. Yes, we can solve this with security technologies like CrowdStrike and putting Google's certificates on it and having JumpCloud technologies there, but mobile device manager, right? But the MDM, again, we need to look at privacy, because I'm not sure I want to put that on my machine, my personal iPhone or someone else's iPhone. And even if someone gets their phone from work and they don't agree, they will get their own private phone. So you have people working with two phones, and that just misses the entire idea. So this is where I would like to see where things are going, and maybe that is unsolvable, because eventually there is going to be some sort of impact on privacy. But I would like to see where that market is going and that's what I'm studying right now.
Yeah, I'll just jump off of what he was saying. I'd say 95% of our employees are using company-issued devices, whether that's a laptop or a tablet or whatever, but we have the 5% that are primarily developers and engineers that want to be able to use their own computers because that's what they're comfortable with. And as we roll out, JumpCloud's agent, for example, we don't want to put that agent on a non-company owned device, because that gives us a lot of control. And ultimately, through the commands, we can run essentially anything we want on any of the computers. And, we don't want to take away employees' privacy outside of the company. And even then, we value very highly the privacy of the company-owned assets per employee.
Yeah, that's a conversation we're having internally about the push and pull between control and privacy. Not specific to anything we're doing, just because it's an important topic. And BYOD, though, from a security perspective, can be bring your own disaster. So it's obviously an area of concern. But this also harkens back to, if we go back a number of slides, back to where we started, because now from a different angle, we're seeing people's personal lives in the technology they use, which used to be confined to the controlled office environment where you could leave work and realistically your home isn't only your castle anymore, work can follow you, but there were those boundaries, there was that separation. So just your observations, Stephen, let's start with you about the types of pushback you might get, the types of conversation you have when you're trying to implement security solutions or to have some type of, say, containerization on a smart device. What are the common refrains you hear and how do you deal with that?
Yeah, like I said, the big one is, employee privacy, and what type of information do we have access to is the big pushback that we receive almost every time that especially when we migrated into JumpCloud or any other type of identity provider. And the big one is, unfortunately, is just kind of based off of our culture and how we resolve that, is that our company's never been interested in accessing employees' data while they're a current employee of ours. So for the most part, at least I'd like to believe that our employees trust us and don't believe that while we have the ability to access that data that we ever would.
Why do you think they trust? It's an important point. I don't want to just bypass it.
Did you say why do they trust us?
Why do you think they trust you? How did you earn that trust?
We actually are just releasing a new policy that puts all this into words, but from a very base level, we have Google Workspace, and our IT admins are able to reset passwords or generate two-factor codes to get in there. And even if it's a slight hindrance to company profits. For example, one of our senior designers was on vacation, and she was the only one that had a copy of our new slide decks for our sales team. And we weren't going to call her in off of vacation because it wasn't going to hurt us that bad. And even though we had the access, we were never going to do it. Now, did it cost us a sale? Yes, it cost us at least one sale, because we weren't able to put together such a professional slide deck that we would have liked to. And so I think the employees seeing that we're willing to hurt ourselves to a certain extent to respect their privacy, I think was a big one, at least from our viewpoint.
That's important. And someone who may have less flexibility given the regulators is done. So how do you balance this? How do you balance how far IT may encroach on user privacy or personal time?
So what Stephen said, we will never do something like Stephen didn't do it. We will never do that. Everything is audited eventually, and it's just bad practice. What this actually means is we look at it, we try to empower our employees. Just look at it from a cyber awareness perspective, and you understand that from any point. It's not a matter of how you manage your employees and you put that work-life balance. It's about being there for them, okay? It's being able to support them and eventually support them in anything. So someone has a problem with their own computer, or they're working from home, they have a problem with their internet connection. It's easy to say, go talk to your ISP, right? But that person doesn't know what an ISP is. His internet or her internet is not working right now. We need to help them because they need to work. It's easy. So we're not trying to get away or ignore problems. We're trying to literally be there for the employees. And even if somebody got a phishing email and opened it, didn't click the button, okay, so we know that there's phishing. We use Google Workspace too. It's amazing. It solves like 99% of your phishing problems. But we do educate that person about what happened. Why is it so important? How we can, why did he or she fall into that trap? it's not about blaming, it's about empowering, and that's the key. This is how you gain trust, and that is where you gain that work-life balance, because your colleagues, the employees, will know when to actually talk to you when you're at home, and when it can be delayed for the next day.
Thank you. That's a terrific response. Some good insights there. So we have a bunch of questions that have come in, and we want to respect the time of our listeners as well. You're here not to just hear me talk and look at slides. So our first question is that I've been working on a spike for zero trust in our organization. Some of the roadblocks are software that we can use that constantly needs to be upgraded weekly, such as Slack or Adobe products. And for some reason, those programs still require admin rights in order to update, and that it's a real pain. And this person is looking for some tips and tricks. Which one of you wants to take this one?
Stephen, or you, or myself?
Yeah, Don, are you comfortable? I'm still very new to the zero trust.
Okay, Don, go ahead.
So, yeah, that's a good question. And so if we look at Slack, I think is running over Electron. Why does it have administrative rights? I don't know, but we need to solve that problem. So I would go in two different ways. So if you don't have a cloud directory that is able to push commands towards your systems, I would use tools, like I said, like Chocolati, which is, for example, Choco, and then update, and then the name of the package. It has literally 99% of the packages you will need, and it will do that for you silently. That is something that will solve it, because if you run that as a scheduled task using administrative rights, assuming you have that on that machine, you'll be able to run that every day. Schedule. That would be your low tech, minimal investment, and you will just need to push that scheduled task to your computers. If you use tools like we use in JumpCloud, I'll share, at the beginning, JumpCloud didn't have Chocolati support or package support. We were doing that ourselves. We take a computer, we click a button, it's deployed. So then I contacted our team there and said, yeah, why not use Chocolati? Yeah, we're thinking about it, it's in the roadmap. Now you just put that, and it manages for you. So these are tools that a cloud directory can give you, and it doesn't really matter if it's JumpCloud or any other tool. It's about what you get from being able to manage these machines and computers remotely when you don't need that physical contact. Now,
okay, you hit it on the head here. This person has replied saying that they use Chocolati and that you shared some good ideas. So thank you, Adon. And I think, Stephen, we'll get to this one, but before we start, there's going to be content published in the near future about how to harden Windows in Macs using policies that you would typically do in Active Directory using the cloud directory. So that's content I'm working on in the moment. So this question is very appropriate. We have a security-focused MSP startup, and want to streamline their workflows and protect customers more. And they want to do it more effectively than traditional Active Directory models. So there's a number of touch points there. Stephen, let's see your response.
Yeah, we're not an MSP, so I can answer. I can hopefully hit some of the nails on the head with this, but maybe not all of them. I know for a fact that JumpCloud works with MSPs and has a way for the MSPs to manage multiple organizations. This isn't a sales pitch for JumpCloud, but I would imagine that OneLogin and Okta and other agencies also, or other companies also have that abilities to do the same thing. But yeah, because JumpCloud has the MSP capability where you can set like global administrators that they can access different tenants, and then I believe you can set tenant-only administrators as well. JumpCloud would be a great fit, or along another provider would be a great fit, just because Active Directory traditionally only manages Windows devices. whereas one of these other companies can also manage Mac, Linux, and Windows as well, along with plenty of other options that traditional Active Directory can't do.
Okay, and this is really perfect to your use case, Adon. And just give me 1 second to explain a few things. You touched on something, Stephen, that's really important, is that IT administrators really need to start thinking about users versus devices.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the change going from 2021 into 2022 and onward. And something else too is attribute-based access control, where there's some business rules built in, which I believe, Adon, is, I'm encroaching on your answer, but typically in the old world of Windows, you need well, you need to see a red forest for admins to segregate them from the rest of Active Directory if you really wanted to do security right. And you would also need to temporarily elevate permissions and such. But then when you create a group, groups have nested permissions, and a lot of rights and privileges can be inherited. But Adon, let's move on to what you're doing, because you have a lot of good stuff that you've accomplished.
So the person that asked that question, I want to direct this to you. So if we look at MSPs as multiple subsidiary companies and we manage the entire group, it's very similar. So we have 10. It's like we have 10 companies, but I don't want to have 10 accounts in that same thing, that same cloud directory. Once you're able to create groups of users and groups of devices, you're able to mix and match that. And once you're able to mix and match it, you basically hit that point where you get finer security. Saying that, if you still have an AD or an LDAP, that is fine, because if you have an AD, you can install an agent there where that AD is being managed from that cloud directory. Or you can do the opposite, saying that AD is trusting an LDAP endpoint. If you do that, you're achieving your Kerberos security if you're a Windows shop or Soundbar or whatever you're using, and still being able to manage the connection between a user and a computer. So what I'm basically saying here is that this will give you better security, easier management. You just need to analyze the building blocks that you're using in order to choose the right thing to put where. I hope I didn't confuse you, but if you want, you can hit me on LinkedIn. I'll help you.
That's really good of you and super cool. Okay, so we have a question, and this is something we've all encountered. I mentioned the silly biometric clocks. So from the user perspective, long passwords or passphrases can be difficult to remember, and they often get reset. Biometrics are the most effective way to confirm someone's identity. It's what you are. They're hard to fool, but that's not realistic. It can be pricey, even though some of my Mac here has a little biometric reader built in. Just a quick plug for my favorite platform. So what MFA methods are most secure, such as YubiKeys or smart cards? How's that worked for you? And Stephen, there's a lot of things here. There's a lot of aspects. I've got YubiKeys on my desk too, but that doesn't mean that using push notifications isn't also secure. So Stephen, how have you sorted all this out and made your users happy, especially when Git needs MFA, and that's where your crown jewels are as developers?
Yeah, we are currently rolling out MFA to our entire company and hardening some specific SAML applications such as Git, because it has the keys to the kingdom for in most cases. One thing that, again, not a sales plug for JumpCloud, but one thing that JumpCloud just rolled out, and I know Duo's had for a while, is that they do push notifications for approvals for a multi-factor authentication, and it's been fantastic for us. I log into, as an administrator, I log into the admin portal and the user portal quite a lot, and so not having to pull up a multi-factor authentication, type in a 6-digit code, or wait for a text message or a phone call to come in has saved me a ton of time. I can just tap the approve button on the push notification. YubiKeys were something else that we looked at doing previously. I like YubiKeys, but that still comes with the inherent risk of what happens if you lose it. You know, sometimes YubiKeys can get very, very tiny. And we were looking at ones that we can put on your keyring, but in college, I lost my keys 3 times. $600 later for replacement car keys, I finally learned how to not lose them. But in the time, you know, I lost at least one YubiKey along with that. So the push notifications have been a really big help. Duo is a great system. JumpCloud's rolling it out to the rest of the infrastructure that they manage. But yeah, I think push notifications, biometrics are also great. But again, I see, just like David said.
Yeah, I had the experience of buying a bunch of YubiKeys and love them. And the idea was to roll them out in different departments using something that ran on the domain controller, where there'd be a quick co-burst token created as a username as a second factor when someone touched the key, and then they'd type in their password. You can imagine in practice how many how many help desk tickets that generated. So it quickly became that IT only used the YubiKeys only to elevate from being a standard user to a privileged user for IT tasks. So I ended up with a box full of YubiKeys, and now YubiKeys have jumped a generation to FIDO5. So it has to be the right match for your culture and people, with the acceptance and ongoing support after you deploy MFA as well, because that's something that has to be considered the administrative overhead, and I've lived it. It looks like we have another question here. And Don?
For the last question, I want to add something about the YubiKey to the person that asked the MFA. It's not about which MFA is more secure. It's about adopting MFA, because MFA can have multiple ways of it. For example, our approach on using rolling out JumpCloud, and I'm sharing this, we're a Google workspace, very, very intensive on that. So for me, if I'm now adding, although I can do SAML and then connect it back there, I didn't want to go that route, because a lot of applications are just using sign with Google. So I was using the opposite. So basically, JumpCloud controls Google's passwords. I'm using the Google MFA for most of that login. That works perfectly. And I also have JumpCloud's MFA. Now, JumpCloud has an app, that's fine. But for user experience, Google is fine. Google works. And once you're logged in with Google, which is where your email at, that took a lot of the risk away from anything. Our back office applications use it. Now, if you want more security, you can use YubiKey and attach it to this. You can use their authenticator app, and that's what I use, which is pretty cool, over Bluetooth, and it uses my device's password, which is hard-coded to the device, and it unlocks my computer and unlocks other accounts. So it's not about which MFA is more secure. MFA is secure, period. And some techs, like firewalls or Wi-Fi, will need to add that token, and you will use a comma and then that number, because that's the only way.
That's MFA one of the workflows we discussed. That's absolutely cool.
Write that one. But the idea is adopt it, understand it, and while you're doing it, make that the best effort you can in order to roll it out, so your employees and your colleagues won't hate you for it, and it will be as minimal as an impact. That is the most important thing.
Good point. Just don't use SMS. Okay, so we have another question. What is a good IT asset management system? We have someone who is a guest here saying that they use Snipeit, an open source asset manager, to manage some equipment, remote equipment in office. So what would you recommend? Let's go back to Stephen. Or pass, it's up to you.
Yeah, I can half answer it, and then we can throw it back to you, Don. I really like Snipeit asset management. I looked at using it as myself internally. Luckily, I have the luxury that we are a PHP shop, primarily development shop. So we looked at Snipeit. It was a little too complex for what we wanted. So what we did was we took some of the parts that we really liked and moved it into our own Laravel app, which is the framework that Snipeit's built off of. And just fully customized it to exactly how we needed it, without all the extra added stuff that Snipeit had that we didn't need.
So we're using what was called SA Manage, which was purchased by SolarWinds. Now I think it's called SolarWinds Service Desk. And when I chose that platform back when it was just a startup, when it was an Israeli startup, I think like 7-8 years ago, I just wanted to be able to audit my licenses. So it has an agent, tells me what it is, and then I can manage my contracts and see what's going on. Really easy. Then it became our service desk and integrates with remote access systems and has many more features like workflows and all the ITIL stack that you can choose how to implement. If you're choosing a platform for IT asset management, that's when you need to hold up for a second and say, what am I trying to manage? Because you don't want to take that system that will limit you or not allow you to grow with it into other areas as you grow. If you're just 10 computers, it's easy. Think about what will happen if you're going to be 100 computers and you have 200 employees. How you want to manage that? How you want to manage purchasing? How do you manage contracts? How do you want to manage reminders for contracts and subscriptions? That is what you need to think about a system, and not what you're using right now.
Absolutely, and thank you, Adon. Thank you, Stephen, for your insights and sharing your time with us today. Okay, so unless there's any final points on life-work balance that we haven't discussed where we'd want to take a few moments, feel free to speak up. There's a number of resources where these types of conversations happen regularly. JumpCloud's IT Hour, the JumpCloud Lounge, Slack workspace, their weekly demos and more webinars. I participate in onboarding hours weekly, more of an observer than an active participant, but people come there and have a lot of practical questions. So those are resources to really take advantage of, and it's not shoving any type of product or platform down your neck. So we hope that we were useful for you today, and your time was spent. It was valuable time spent with us, and really thank you all for your time and attention. And now, one last thing, Stephen, you noted. Let's give you the talking stick before we wrap up.
Yeah, I just had one last point that I wanted to say about the asset management was the issue we're having right now is that I only thought about where we were at right now and where we were going in 6 months. If you're going to pick up an asset management system, think about where you're going to be in 2 or 3 years, because we've hit a roadblock and I'm having to rebuild our asset management system from the ground up because I didn't think 2 years down the line.
Yeah, and that's also the mindset of users and IT being aligned with the company needs and growth. So, believe that is it for today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
And thanks to our panel.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.